start this webinar. So welcome to this briefing on the outcome of the 2023 meetings of the conferences of the parties to the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. My name is Andrea Lechner and I'm a program officer in the Secretariat. And I'm happy to take you now through these outcomes of the COPs. And at the end, we have an opportunity to ask questions or make any comments or have a discussion. So as you all know, the 3 COPs took place from the 1st to the 12th of May in Geneva. It was actually the 16th meeting of the Basel COP and the 11th meeting of the Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention COPs. And the meetings were held under the theme of accelerating actions, targets for the sound management of chemicals and waste. The meetings were attended by over 1,400 delegates, with about 1,000 being party representatives and nearly 400 participants from observer entities. So quite a big meeting, and there was a lot going on. We have 54 decisions that were adopted, 28 for the Basel COP, 15 for Rotterdam, and 27 for Stockholm. And among these, 8 are joint decisions that were adopted by the 3 conferences of the parties. We also had more than 45 side events taking place, so these are really an opportunity for parties and observers to discuss more in depth the implementation of the convention and share their experiences and lessons learned. We also hosted a PCB fair from the 3rd to the 5th of May, with the intention of raising awareness towards the very rapidly approaching deadlines under the Stockholm Convention for the elimination of PCB by 2025 and the environmentally sound management by 2028. So this was again an opportunity to discuss further among parties and observers how to deal with these chemicals. Let's look then specifically at the outcomes under each of the conventions, starting with the Basel Convention. One of the most prominent outcomes of this COP is the adoption of technical guidelines on the environmentally sound management of plastic waste. So these were updated and they are really very important contribution to the discussions on how to address the ever-increasing challenges related to plastic waste, and they'll also be a very important piece of information for the upcoming internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. The Basel Convention COP also adopted updated technical guidelines on the ESM of POPs waste, and those were the general technical guidelines on POPs waste, as well as those specific to PFOS and related substances, in particular to address the recent listing at the previous COP on Stockholm of the chemicals PFHXS, its salts and related compounds. Then there were also the technical guidelines on e-waste were adopted on an interim basis, and that was in particular to reflect the amendments related to the e-waste entries that were adopted by the last COP. Then there are a couple of technical guidelines on which the work will continue in the next intersessional period. Those are in particular the guidelines on waste lead-acid batteries, on other batteries, and also on pneumatic tires. Another prominent discussion at the last Basel COP related to how to improve this prior informed consent procedure that is set up through the Basel Convention. And there was already a compilation of information in the past and a synthesis report prepared. And now a small intersessional working group was set up to work on this topic. They will collect challenges, best practices, and possible approaches and initiatives, and will then make a recommendation on that to the next COP. Very much related to this work is the work on electronic approaches to notification and movement documents, and that work will also continue in parallel, but also in close cooperation with the work of the SIWG. On the strategic framework, you might know that the Basel Convention has or had a strategic framework that ran out, and a small intersessional working group has been developing recommendations on how to improve a future framework. And the COP now decided to task the SIWG to actually make a proposal for this new strategic framework to the next COP for possible adoption. In the area of work of legal clarity, there also the work will continue. So the work there is really aimed at reviewing the annexes to the Basel Convention with a view to clarifying disposal operations and hazardous wastes covered by the Convention. And there are two big areas of work that will happen there. The expert working group working on this topic will on the one hand look at an amendment proposal by the European Union to amend Annex 4 and submit a revised amendment proposal to the next open-ended working group. And then on the other hand, they're also continuing their work on reviewing Annexes 1 and 3. The Implementation and Compliance Committee, they're the COP adopted recommendations on how to improve parties' compliance with a range of obligations. So one to highlight here could be the work they're undertaking in terms of national reporting and how to increase national reporting and how to achieve a number of targets that the committee is setting related to national reporting. The COP also adopted a program of work for the committee for the next biennium. And here one area of work just to highlight would be how to integrate the fulfillment of the Convention's requirements into the national development frameworks. So this is a topic that's becoming very important in order to support parties to implement the Convention. Looking then at the partnership program, there are 4 partnerships currently under the Basel Convention. The Partnership for Action on Challenges Relating to E-Waste, then the Environmental Network for Optimizing Regulatory Compliance on Illegal Traffic, or ENFORCE, how we call it, and then the partnerships on plastic waste and household waste. So for all of these, the COP reviewed the progress that has been made and adopted their work plans and tasked them to do specific tasks from now to the next COP. For example, the Household Waste Partnership is to revise the overall guidance document on environmentally sound management of household waste. Several of these partnerships, 3 of them actually, they had a subscription fee in place where members from business and industry, non-governmental organizations and academia were asked to make an annual contribution to these partnerships in order to be part of them. But after an analysis of the costs and benefits of the subscription fee system, it was decided to withdraw it. So these partnerships will now be funded only by voluntary contributions. And the terms of references of the partnerships have been amended accordingly. Then looking at the work under the Basel Convention in cooperation with the World Customs Organization. So here the intention is that the convention is working with the World Customs Organization in order to facilitate the inclusion of Basel Convention waste in the harmonized system and to allocate harmonized system codes for this waste. And this work is also continuing, and the new element is that parties and observers have been invited to submit information in order to assist the Secretariat in this work. And then the Secretariat is to continue developing proposals for amending these HS codes and facilitating the review of proposals based on that information also from parties and observers. On national reporting, the COP underlined the importance of this information provided in national reports, including for measuring progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Secretariat was requested to work on developing practical guidelines on the development of inventories for some specific waste streams. And then in addition, information is collected on which other waste streams parties would find guidance useful, and that will then be discussed at the open-ended working group at its 14th meeting. Related to the e-waste amendments, so I mentioned these before at the last COP, amendments to the convention related to the e-waste entries were adopted. And from these amendments, there are a couple of changes needed to existing guidelines and fact sheets and manuals. And the COP has tasked the Secretariat to update these documents to reflect the e-waste amendments. Moving on then to the Rotterdam Convention. One of the main outcomes under the Rotterdam Convention is the listing of a new chemical in Annex 3. So that is turbofos, a pesticide. It used to be it is being used in a number of crops, but it has been identified as posing an extremely high hazard to terrestrial organisms. And based on a recommendation from the Chemical Review Committee, this chemical was now included in Annex 3 to the Convention. And this amendment to the Convention will enter into force for all parties on the 22nd of October this year. And on that date, the Secretariat will send a letter to all parties asking them for their import responses, meaning whether they wish to continue importing this chemical. So with that, the chemical would then be subject to the PIC procedure that is foreseen under the Rotterdam Convention. There were also 6 other chemicals recommended for listing by the CRC that were considered by this COP. Some of them older ones, also some newer ones. So there were acetochlor, carbosulfan, chrysotyl asbestos, fenthion formulations, paraquat formulations. And for these, the COP could not reach consensus on listing them in Annex 3, so they will be considered at a future meeting. A very big discussion, very heated discussion at the COP related to the enhancing of the effectiveness of the convention, and very much to what I just described, that many of the chemicals recommended for listing by the Chemical Review Committee are not being included in the convention because there is opposition from some parties. So the COP had in front of it a proposal by a number of parties to amend the convention. And the intention was to set up a new Annex 8 under the convention, where chemicals would be subject to the PIC procedure, but they would be, or they could be listed there also by voting if it wasn't possible to list them there by consensus. And that annex would only have applied to the parties that would have ratified the amendment. However, that proposal was not accepted. It was brought to a vote towards the end of the meeting, and it did not reach the required threshold to be accepted. On the other hand, there have also been discussions on what else could be done to enhance the effectiveness of the convention, and there was agreement by parties to launch an intersessional work on this topic, and it focuses on addressing the impacts of the listing of chemicals. So basically, parties and observers are invited to submit information, and the Secretariat will then compile that and prepare a report for the next COP. Related to the Compliance Committee of the Convention, the COP adopted its program of work for the next biennium, and also once again invited parties that are unable to comply with certain obligations under the Convention to consider making a submission to the committee. And then just to highlight, one of the other elements of that decision is that there is a questionnaire for parties to respond, trying to identify issues related to notifications of final regulatory action. So the COP encouraged parties to submit responses to this questionnaire in order to help the committee deliver its work. A decision was also adopted related to the implementation of the convention. It's very much in line with decisions adopted previously by the COP on that matter, and it encourages parties to ensure an effective operation of the convention, contributing certain information, for example, information that might assist other parties to prepare and notify final regulatory action, also to respond to a periodic questionnaire that is being carried out on the implementation of several articles of the convention. Moving on then to the Stockholm Convention. The major or most remarkable outcome probably under the Stockholm Convention is the adoption of procedures and mechanism on compliance. So after 15 years of negotiation, the Stockholm Convention finally has a compliance mechanism. And so now it's the last of the 3 BRS conventions that joins the club of the conventions having a compliance mechanism. And the intention is to assist parties in fulfilling their obligations under the convention. And it's also composed of the same 2 tracks as the other 2 conventions, one on systemic issues of interest to all parties, and then the second track is to address challenges faced by individual parties. While the mechanism and the committee itself were established, the members were not yet elected, so they will be elected at the next COP, which also means that the committee is not starting work until after the next COP. Then also at the COP11, the Stockholm Convention undertook its second effectiveness evaluation. So that was an important exercise because now it allowed comparison towards the first effectiveness evaluation. And the general outcome from this process is that the convention provides an effective and dynamic framework for regulating POPs throughout the life cycle. And progress has occurred since the first evaluation in 2017. Nevertheless, many challenges remain. So the report contains a big number of recommendations on how to further improve in the various areas of work of the convention. Then there was also the 3rd global monitoring report posted in time for this COP. So that was also part actually of the effectiveness evaluation. And also the 3rd global monitoring report shows that the regulations in place targeting POPs have succeeded in reducing levels of POPs in humans and the environment. So also good news on that side. And the new Stockholm Convention Regional Center has been endorsed by the parties. It's actually an existing Basel Convention Regional Center in Trinidad and Tobago, and it has now also become a Stockholm Convention Regional Center servicing the parties in that region. The other major outcome under Stockholm is, of course, the listing of 3 new chemicals in Annex A. So the first one is methoxychlor, which is a pesticide. It has been used as a replacement for DDT. And then during its evaluation, the POPs review committee has more or less assessed that there is not much of production and use left of it. No requests for exemptions have been made. So it was listed in Annex A without specific exemptions, meaning that it may no longer be produced, used, imported, or exported by parties to the convention. And then there are 2 industrial chemicals, the first one being Decloran Plus. So that one is a flame retardant. It used to be marketed as a replacement to commercial decabromodiphenyl ether in a number of applications, in particular motor vehicles. And this chemical was listed with specific exemptions, not for production of the chemical, but for use of existing stocks in a number of applications, for example, in motor vehicles, industrial medical devices, and you find a specific list under this decision that shows you how long each of these exemptions apply. Moving on then to UV328, so that one is a UV absorbent, and it's also used in many different applications and as an additive to plastic, for example, also in the automotive industry. And here specific exemptions have been agreed to, so it's still allowed to be produced and used for a certain amount of time, but it is included in Annex A to the convention. Related to studying the listing of these chemicals, the COP also identified that there are still a lot of challenges for parties in terms of identifying POPs in stockpiles, products, and articles in use and waste. And it has requested the POPs review committee, so that's the subsidiary body under the Stockholm Convention, to make recommendations regarding options for identifying POPs in stockpiles, products, and articles in use and waste. And that will be then considered at the future COP. Related to the elimination of PCB, so as mentioned before, we have very rapidly approaching deadlines of 2025 for the elimination in use and 2028 for environmentally sound waste management. And there was a report prepared on progress in eliminating PCBs, and the COP took note of that. And it urged parties to meet their obligations towards these deadlines while recognizing that there are specific needs and challenges for developing countries. In particular, the funding needs required are immense to help address the huge stock of PCB contaminated equipment that remains. Moving then on to joint decisions, to highlight that the COP has given the Secretariat a strengthened mandate for international cooperation with many different entities, including UNEP, for example, with the new plastic treaty that's currently being negotiated, also with the science policy panel that is being developed, then also with the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, SICAM, then the United Nations Environment Assembly and their related work, with the Minamata Convention on Mercury, with the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and then also with the organizations of the Inter-Organization Program for the Sound Management of Chemicals. So with all of these entities, there has been really a request to further strengthen the cooperation and collaboration. The COP also mandated further work in the area of combating illegal traffic and trade in hazardous chemicals and waste. So these is an activity across the 3 conventions. And then a new area of work is that the Secretariat was asked to explore the development of a resource mobilization strategy for non-state actors. The COPs adopted the budgets and program of work for the conventions for the next biennium, with an approximate increase of 4% across the 3 conventions. And it also adopted the amendments to the memorandums of understanding between UNEP and the COPs. And in the case, it's UNEP, FAO, and the COPs. You will remember that there was a proposal from UNEP to amend these MOUs in order to bring further clarity to the services that are provided by UNEP. And the amendments were adopted. And last but not least, there was also an agreement on the next meetings of the COPs. So they are to take place from 28 April to 9 May in Geneva, and to include a high-level segment, because there's an agreement from previous COPs that every second round of COPs would include a high-level segment. And since the 2023 did not include a high-level segment, it's now time again in 2025 for a high-level segment. And on this final slide, you can see the presidents of the 3 COPs. On the left, you have Anna Berechiani from Georgia, who was the Rotterdam Convention COP president. In the middle, Ms. Kima Gardena, the Stockholm COP president. And on the right, Mr. Reginald Hernaus from the Netherlands as the Basel COP president. We'd also like to bring to your attention the follow-up to the COPs and what is happening now. And this is a lot of very detailed slides, so I will not go through them in detail. You will be receiving the slides, so you will have it all, but also to say that on the website, if you go to the section related to the COPs, for each of the websites, Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, you then have a section on call for information. And that's where you find these letters in case you haven't received them, because after every COP, we send out a letter to parties and observers, informing them of the various requests of information or requests to nominate participants in working groups. And these are posted also there on this website. And this is also a summary. So there's a lot of them for the various areas of work. For example, for strategic framework on the PIC procedure, there are small intersessional working groups where members and leads can be nominated. Then also for the update of the technical guidelines that are ongoing. So you see there's further work on the technical guidelines on POPs waste and also e-waste. And here on this slide, you see more deadlines for nomination of participants in the various groups, also on electronic approaches, and yeah, to submit further information on other specific topics. Then related to the implementation of and compliance committee, they have a lot of requests for information out there. Many are to be responded by with a specific questionnaire. So you have links towards these questionnaires. And just to say, whenever it's not yet defined, when it says to be determined, that means the Secretariat will send a separate follow-up request, including with in some cases with a specific questionnaire to be answered. So in those cases, you can wait for a second invitation to provide specifically the comments. And here a couple more related to the partnerships and national legislation and notifications. Moving on then to the Rotterdam Convention, there are a couple of requests for information under status of implementation. Like I mentioned before, also this questionnaire. That's an example of one of these where the questionnaire is still to be made available. And then for the enhancing of the effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention, so this intersessional process I referred to, here you can see the specific information that the COP asked for, and that is due next year only, 30 June 2024. And then also here the requests from the compliance committee, including the link towards the questionnaire on the final regulatory action, which is actually due very soon. So if you're planning to contribute to that, please do so quickly. Moving on then to Stockholm. So their information is also sought for participation in a couple of small intersessional working groups like PCB, and then also specific chemical related intervention that relates very often to an assessment of needs of specific exemptions. So that's also the case of DDT and PFOS. Here you have some comments on best available techniques, best environmental practices related to some guidance documents that are being prepared, or also to be an expert on the expert roster. Under implementation plans, it's also related to comments on guidance documents and some other matters. And here again, POPROC looking for specific technical information on chemicals in order to do the work. Also related to this work on POPs in stockpiles, products and articles in use and waste that I mentioned before. Also for Stockholm, there is an assessment of the funding needs going on now in this cycle. So here a certain amount of information will be collected, but that's also for next year only, and then also for the upcoming 6th review of the financial mechanism. And on joint issues, there is a technical assistance needs assessment going on during this intersessional period that will then feed into the development of the next technical assistance plan, but it's also a little bit further away. And then also collecting information on synergies in preventing, combating illegal traffic and trade. And in case you wish to offer to host the 2027 meetings of the COPs, there's also a deadline provided for that. With that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And it's now time for any questions or comments you would like to make. Just to say again that absolutely, yes, you will get the presentation. We will send it by email. We'll also try to share it directly, though this morning we had a technical problem with that, but we'll see if we can also share it with you directly. So if you have any questions or comments, please either write them into the chat or raise your hand, and then we can give you the floor. Thank you very much, and I'll wait a moment to see if you have any questions or comments. Thank you. I see that we have a comment from Dervisha van Scheltinga from Ciel related to the publishing of the guidelines for the ESM of plastic waste. So in advanced English, they are already on the website, and my colleague will send us a link in the chat on how you can find them. But in English, they are already available, and now we're translating the changes that were made at the COP. To the technical guidelines on plastic waste. And thank you, Ross, for the question on the bracketed element in the plastic waste technical guidelines. We're just checking and we'll get back to you in a second. If there are any other questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to send them or to raise your hand. In the meantime, about the dates and place of the BRS COP next year, quickly put that slide on again. So it's 28 April to 9 May 2025. So no COP next year. Our usual rhythm is every 2 years only. So we had very special last 3 years because of the pandemic, where we had separate segments of the COPs, but the normal rhythm is that we have a COP every 2 years only. So the next one being in 2025. Be sure about your question on the plastic waste guidelines. So no, the bracketed elements will not be brought to the OEWG, because if you look at the decision, there is no request for now to continue working or for the OEWG to look into it. The decision does acknowledge that there's a need for further information on the technologies, but there is no request to, for an intersessional working group or the open-ended working group to continue the work. It's also not part of the work program of the open-ended working group. So for now, there is no work continuing on the plastic waste guidelines. They were really adopted, at least for this point in time, until the COP decides to work again on the updating. Thank you. All right. Emily, do we want to try if we can transfer the presentation on the spot, if it's working now? Ah, it's looking good. So you should have a window that popped up saying file transfer. And yes, now you can click on outcome of the 2023 BRS COPs, and then you can click on download. So then you have it right away, but we can also send it by email after the session if you have any problem downloading it now. You cannot see the window. I'm not sure. Emily, is there anything that can be done if there's not a pop-up coming? It's coming right over the slide.
Excuse me, Andrea, could you, because that's the normal, display when you do the transfer.
Yeah, for me it worked, and I see others also saying it's working. Okay, well, in any case, we'll also send it by email, maybe on the phones. I'm not sure if it works if you're connected from a phone, but we can also send it by email afterwards. Okay, I see no raised hand. No more questions in the chat. So if that's good for everybody, then I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. Reminds me, also wanted to say that the report of the meeting is not yet out. So we're hoping to get it available, well, in English, but it's still also going to take a couple of weeks, probably, hopefully within the next months, it would be available in English, and then translation takes, a couple more months. But if you have any questions in the meantime, please do not hesitate to contact us anytime. Thank you very much. And have a great afternoon or morning and day. Bye-bye.